Welcome, LDI groups, to week 5 of our Lenten Discipleship Institute. Last week we talked about being a fruitful people of love. Here in this week we're going to be talking about a witnessing people of love. And the promise that we're going to be focusing on comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. So, Chris, the promise that Jesus begins with is this promise of peace, which is this amazing, wonderful promise that comes out of the Old Testament, which we use the word shalom.
Yeah.
It's
really just like flourishing. It's this sense of wholeness and satisfaction in delighting in the relationships you have. It's a sense of oneness with God, and everything is right. Things are just right.
Yeah. There's even peace with yourself, with who you are and the way you are.
Yes.
And that can be contrasted with the peace that the world gives. Jesus says that the world gives a kind of peace, but the peace that the world gives is a peace that's motivated, I think, by self-love.
For sure, yeah.
And that can be contrasted with the love that Jesus, the peace that Jesus gives which is that
self-sacrificing,
the agape love.
And thinking outward.
That's right. So the peace that the world gives is a peace that passes away. It fades. The shalom of God it's eternal. It's forever.
Yes.
It can't be taken away. The peace that the world gives it's really circumstance based. It's based on what's going on around you, how you're doing. Whereas the peace, the shalom that Jesus gives, it's irrespective of our circumstances.
Yes. Yeah.
The peace that Jesus promised is a peace that comes from the inside and works its way out, whereas the world's peace it really comes from the outside and it works its way inward. So it's this wonderful promise of peace.
Yes, yeah. And that peace is, just like love, is supposed to then begin to move out. And in fact, Jesus gives a second promise. He promises that we will be witnesses. Mm-hmm. In John 15:27, I think he says, "The Holy Spirit will testify about me, and you too will be my witnesses." And I think the word behind that is martyreo, and that you get the word martyr from. It's this sense of giving accurate testimony from direct knowledge. Really almost like a blood witness. You're willing to speak the truth even if it costs your life, even if there's opposition. You're going to speak what is right and true.
So what does it mean to be a witnessing people of Jesus?
James talks about faith and works, and you show me your faith apart from your works. I'll show you my faith by my works. How does, when we're thinking about witnessing, how do you see works and words and faith kind of play into how we share?
Well, there's a sequence usually, and it's works first, then words. And the works of good fruit of our witness open opportunities for the direct sharing of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of examples in church history that I can think of, whether it's in the 2nd century when there was plague and it was the Christians who were staying in the cities rather than running, caring for those who were dying. And the world saw that.
Yep. And
they recognized that there was a hope within us that was not within them. Or in the 4th century, especially in the East, there was a transformation around sickness. Yes. In which the Christians were the very first ones starting hospitals. And it became these amazing complexes which would be caring for people who were very sick. And it was the Christians who had a transformed understanding of even what it meant to be ill.
Yes. Yep.
And that being ill was to be close to Christ, and therefore, rather than illness being a stigma, it was something to go after and hold on to those who were sick and to care for them. It was out of that spirit that created the hospitals. That was kind of this embodied witness that the church has had. So as the church lives into the shalom that we've been called into, it does a lot of things that many people benefit, not just for the church, but many outside. And as that happens, people they sit up and say, what's going on here? And that opens opportunity to share the message of Jesus Christ. This is why we're doing this. This is who Jesus is. And sometimes we have to take risk in starting that conversation, and we have to be listening to the Holy Spirit as He guides us. Is this person someone I need to be talking to? And there's always a conversation in which there will be a moment in which there's a chance to take the conversation directly to Jesus.
Right.
And that's where you have to be listening, and you have to have a little bit of courage.
Yeah, it is not just works. Who are we, any of us, to think that we can just, because of the way we live our lives, someday is going to accept the Lord? No, it's all about Jesus. And despite our failures, we need to point to Him. And the only way we can do that is by talking about Him and sharing who He is and His goodness and mercy. And we, as I said, we fail. And the world, boy, does the world recognize how we fail.
Yeah, it does. We often look like a country club for saints, at least we think we're saints, rather than being a hospital for sinners.
Yeah, I mean, you think of just in recent weeks and over the past few months, I can think of two major Christian leaders who have had significant moral failures that it's not just us noticing, the whole world recognizes that we look like hypocrites.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, let's be honest, the evangelical church in the United States, in some ways feels like there's an onslaught against us that we've in part brought onto ourselves by our own actions, by our own attitudes. We saw this in the entire political race.
We're like stuck in these cultural wars, political alliances, and the divisions that are present in the world. It feels almost no different than the divisions that are present in our church. And it's like, that shouldn't be. Just from a theological perspective too, some churches are just, they're not really studying scripture. It's sort of like a weak theology, easy believism, caving into the culture. The church doesn't look much different than the culture. On the other hand, you have those who are very just strident in their faith and are so critical of culture that they'll never have the opportunity they miss this optimism and joy and engagement with the world. And where does that leave us
I don't know.
Evangelicals? I feel like we're in a crisis right now, that our witness is really not bearing the fruit that we know it should.
Our witness has been deeply undermined.
The first thing that always brings renewal is an honest assessment, of actually admitting, wait a second, there's something wrong with us here. We need to not worry about the sins out there. We need to worry about the sins here, the log in my own eye, rather than the speck of dust in others. And really confess and seek forgiveness.
Yeah, that's going to take a lot of courage, because it will require change on our own part, where we're kind of willing to really see the errors of our way, and to commit back to the covenant way of love, and making sure that love is really what is driving us as God's people.
Yeah, and really starting to earnestly assess ourselves again. Are we living a life with an arrogance, or are we living a life of humility, following Jesus' way? Are we living transparently? Are we truth tellers? Do we hold on to truth, or do we just kind of slightly say things in ways that end up benefiting ourselves rather than blessing others? We need to. What are other ways you think we could? Are
we optimistic, or are we pessimistic?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are tempted to be, because of the fingers being pointed at us, to be quite pessimistic. And that actually that's not really an honest self-assessment, because I think when we look at the church, even our own local church, there's a lot of good things to be enthusiastic about, where we can say, there is the Spirit of God.
Yes.
There's great fruit here. And so an honest self-assessment sees our strengths and is willing to note them.
Yes.
Rather than just saying, the heck with it, I'm done with this people and in this way, I'm going to go do something else. You got to see the good things.
Or prayer. Are we a prayerful people? Am I praying, or am I just depending on myself? That really is one of the touch points of evaluating your witness. Am I depending on God, or am I depending on myself? And that's always seen most clearly through our desire to pray, to ask God to lead our lives, to ask God to intervene, to have God, the Lord, working out what my future holds. And so that's another place of evaluation. But even if we get all of this right, even if we're living the love out that Jesus speaks about in John 14, 15, and 16, it's not like, well, the world's going to love us then, is it? I mean,
right.
We're always facing opposition.
Jesus said, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world.
He says that the world's going to hate you. I mean, the world hated Jesus.
So let's talk about the world.
Yeah.
So in the theology, the terminology of world, as Jesus and John are using it, it's this Greek word cosmos. Yeah. And there are three different meanings. One is referring to the actual earth, the sphere of the earth. That can be the world. Another can be the people, where God so loved the world, referring to the people. But this is, when Jesus is referring to world in 13 through 17 of John, he has the idea of a fallen human system. It is where the self-love of the individual is combined with the self-love of everyone else. And we create an entire culture or network that is geared toward or directed by self-love. Augustine talks about it as being the city of man.
Yep.
The city of man is this city of which we are constructing, geared towards and directed by, ultimately by self-love. And there are many layers when we want to think about the concept of the world, but we're all kind of socialized within this idea of self-love. It's internal to us, but then outwardly we create lots of cultural structures that reinforce what is already internal to us.
And they're all fallen.
And
they're all destructive.
That's right.
Because they're built on destructive principles.
Right. And so that gets institutionalized within organizations, which are all culture building organizations, from in the arts to the sciences to education, into business and so on, producing technologies, and all of these things are really good. And yet built within these individual organizations that all of us work in or somehow are connected to, there is this underlying current of self-love.
Yeah.
And they're very difficult, they're entrenched with one another, because you might be in a particular school or work at a particular hospital or be a part of a specific business.
Or capitalism or communism or social, they're all...
Those are the social structures in which we're connected to organizations. Those organizations are interconnected with within these social structures, and they're all geared towards self-love, embedded with certain kinds of beliefs that reinforce that self-love.
Yes.
And what's at the bottom of all that is our own. I would call it a spirituality. It's a spirituality of self-love.
Yeah, and it's not a new thing.
No.
This world, the whole idea of an opposition to God goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. Really, well, even before that, it goes to Adam and Eve and their fallenness and Satan, and it's always been this spiritual battle that has worked itself out. There's always been this oppositional presence to the work of God in history. And you had the pride of the Tower of Babel and God dispersing the nations, and that pride was just taken out. But of course, the Lord desired to see redemption. That's from Abraham on. There was this plan to reach the world and bring about restoration and reconciliation, so the opposition isn't there.
But we're also told there's one other component to it, and it's the principalities and powers.
Yes.
Jesus refers to the ruler of this world, this world, is the language that he uses, and the New Testament picks up on that. And so there are invisible, unseen spiritual forces that are a part of this world system that we have that we have all contributed to, inherited, and continue to build out. And there are these spiritual forces working, manipulating us and that system to keep us blinded.
Yeah. And that works itself out. It ends up bringing about destruction. That's what Satan wants, right? That's he is angry at God, and he's taking it out on the world. But you still look at the world. I mean, it's not like everything's bad.
No, of course not.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of good in the world. There's a lot of good in culture.
Right. We call it common grace.
Yeah.
So God's grace is poured out over the good and the evil. So, when we look at the arts, or we look at the sciences, or we look at education, or we look at technology, all of these things are, by God's design, intended for good. And the world, combined with the evil one and those evil influences, takes what is good and distorts it.
Yes.
And brings about a misuse of it, which we would call misused by our own self-love.
Yeah. Well, as evangelicals, that is actually part of our own definition of who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to engage in culture. We're called to use our gifting that God gives us to be in the academics, in science, in business, and be a witness in the presence of culture, and identifying these good things as, well, really from God himself, really speaking about that.
And Jesus says, so he's not, when he prays for us in John 17, he doesn't pray that we would be taken out of the world, but that the evil one would not be in us and controlling us.
Yeah.
So we're to be in the world, but the world is not to be in us.
Yeah.
And as we're in the world, we are this contrary kind of people pointing to a different way.
Yeah.
The way of joy, the way of peace, of that shalom.
Through our worldview, through our work, and through our words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the great hope, the great promise that Jesus gives us, it's that in the world, he says, you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world.
Yes. Yep.
So we hope you have a great study this coming week as you consider us as a witnessing people of love.